Good day. Even as the United States finds itself in a dangerous face off in Ukraine with Russia, a nuclear armed military superpower, it is drifting, perhaps unknowingly, into a very similar and equally dangerous face off with another nuclear military superpower, China, over the issue of Taiwan. That this is so is demonstrated by what happened over the course of the visit of Japanese Prime Minister Suga to Washington, where he had a meeting with President Joe Biden and also met with Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, before I discuss what happened during this meeting and the Chinese reaction, I think some brief history is necessary. First of all, Taiwan, or the island of Formosa, as it was once, as the island on which the nation of Taiwan is based, was once referred to, was formerly an integral part of China, and the population of Taiwan is ethnically and culturally Chinese. The problem of Taiwan dates back and is a piece of unresolved problem left over from the Chinese Civil War of the 1940s, which brought the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, to power in China, where they established the Chinese People's Republic. When Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communists won, the previous government in the mainland, that of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, fled mainland China and established themselves in the island of Formosa, Taiwan, where they became, or where they claimed to be, the legitimate government of the entirety of China. At that time, Chiang Kai-shek and his government, made up of the Kuomintang Party, had the support of the United States, which continued to recognize Chiang Kai-shek as the true leader of China, and the government that he established in Taiwan as the true government of China. The Taiwan government, or the government that is based in Taiwan, in Taipei, I shall refer to it in future as the Taipei government, at that time enjoyed US military protection, and China, the mainland Chinese government, which I shall in future refer to simply as China, was in no position to challenge or threaten it, or to reoccupy Taiwan because of the overwhelming power of the US Navy and the US Air Force, which at that time dominated the Pacific region. Now, in the 1970s, the United States began its long rapprochement with China, and this eventually culminated in a decision by the United States government to recognize the government of China as the true legitimate government of China. So from that moment on, the People's Republic of China was recognized by the United States as the legitimate Chinese state and nation. Now, the United States, as part of that recognition of the People's Republic of China, continued to recognize Taiwan as an integral part of China, and China, of course, continued to conceive of Taiwan as an integral part of China. At that time, Taiwan also perceived itself or conceived itself as an integral part of China. In the 1970s and 1980s, there was no issue in Taiwan that the country was Chinese and a part of China. There was merely a dispute as to whether or not it was the legitimate government of China, or whether the Chinese government, based in mainland China and led by the Communist Party, was China's legitimate government. That was the position recognized by all parties, China, Taiwan, and the United States, until a relatively short time ago. However, as Chinese power has grown, as China has grown massively in strength, as it has gained increasing amount of diplomatic support and recognition to the point where it is now all but universally recognized across the entire international community as the legitimate government of China and of the Chinese nation, it has become increasingly clear to the authorities in Taiwan that they have no real prospect of ever replacing the government in China, the communist government based in Beijing, as the legitimate government of China, and that the government in Beijing is secure and fully established, and that there is no prospect that it is going to fall in any proximate time period. And as a consequence of that realization, Taiwan, or at least some sections of Taiwanese society and some members of Taiwan's political leadership, have started to conceive of a new strategy, which is to secede from China and make Taiwan a fully independent country, a country that is no longer part of China or no longer conceives of itself as part of China, but which is independent of it. Now, for the government in Beijing, and I would stress for the Chinese nation as a whole, this is entirely unacceptable. I said that the issue of Taiwan is an unresolved problem left over from the period of the Chinese Civil War of the 1940s. Many Chinese people, in fact, the overwhelming majority of Chinese people, would put it rather differently. They would say that the problem of Taiwan is a legacy of a century of national humiliation, which began in the 1840s at a time when China's government, the Qing imperial dynasty, was starting to crumble, and China became increasingly the prey of imperialist powers, mainly the European powers, but also Japan, and that over that period of national humiliation, various territories were seized by those imperialist powers and were separated from China. It is part of the achievement of the government in China, of the People's Republic of China, that it has steadily and methodically reacquired all of these breakaway territories, reunited China, and brought the Chinese nation back together. It is also an achievement of the People's Republic, recognized by the vast majority of Chinese people, that it stands up for the Chinese people and that it does not allow interference in China's affairs and does not allow Western powers, especially the European powers, but also the United States, to interfere in China's sovereignty and to make claims on its territory or to support breakaway movements that seek to divide China again. When the Chinese communists won the civil war in China in the 1940s, they made it their objective to reunite China and to reassert China's independence and sovereignty as a great nation. And indeed, the famous words uttered by Mao Zedong at the foundation of the Chinese People's Republic were that the Chinese people have stood up. This is something that the Chinese government in Beijing will never go back on, and there is no conceivable situation where it will ever consider Taiwan a legitimate independent state if Taiwan does attempt to secede from China. So that is the history, and that provides some of the explanation. The difficulty is, I'm not sure to what extent these very powerful feelings, held not just by the Chinese government in Beijing, but the vast majority of Chinese people in China and elsewhere, are properly understood in Washington. Undoubtedly, there are some people in the United States, in Washington, academics, those sort of people, who do understand this, but I suspect that the greater part of the US political class don't. Some of them, at a time when there is growing confrontation between the United States and China, are now increasingly thinking about backing Taiwan's secession from China, formal secession from China, recognizing that Taiwan is no longer the government of China and a part of China, and accepting it as an independent country, as a way of, in effect, supporting what they see as a country that is independent, democratic, anti-communist, and hostile to the government on the Chinese mainland, with which the United States now sees itself as an adversarial relationship. I think for some people in the United States, perhaps it goes a little further than that. I suspect that there are some people viscerally anti-communist and absolutely determined to strike China down in the face of the challenge that China, as they see it, is posing to the United States, which support Taiwan's secession from China, because they think that if they do support that secession, that will cause a major political crisis within China and will embarrass the Chinese government in a way that might destabilize it. I should say straight away that I think that that is a profoundly mistaken view if it is indeed widely held, and indeed any attempt by the United States to support moves within Taiwan towards secession are extremely dangerous. Now, under previous administrations, the United States had stepped back from taking any overt measure which might have indicated that it would support Taiwan's secession. But during the period of Donald Trump's administration, especially after Donald Trump appointed the two neocon hardliners, Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, to the posts of respectively Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, the United States began increasingly to flirt with the idea of supporting Taiwanese independence from China, possibly in pursuit of some of the objectives that I discussed a moment ago. Unfortunately, the Biden administration seems to be going down the same route, though to the extent that it is doing so with any real understanding of what it is doing, I'm not fully sure. Anyway, this became clear over the course of Japanese Prime Minister Suga's visit to Washington. Now, I ought to add that if there is one way also of enraging Chinese opinion, it is by saying things or hinting at things which might suggest support for Taiwanese independence in the context of the visit to the United States of the Prime Minister of Japan. I mentioned that during that century of humiliation, between the 1840s and 1940s, when China practically disintegrated and became the prey of imperialist, predatory powers, it was most of those powers were Western powers, primarily the European colonial empires, though to some extent also the United States. But after the 1890s, the primary and most dangerous of those imperialist, predatory powers that fought prolonged wars in China, seeking to acquire control of Chinese territory, was not the European colonial powers or the United States, but the Empire of Japan. And in fact, after the 1930s, China and Japan became locked in a long war that continued right up until Japan's final defeat in 1945, with China being amongst the victors. It is, incidentally, a forgotten war. One of the great cruel ironies of the Second World War is that many Westerners assume that it began either in 1939, when Germany attacked Poland, or in 1941, when Japan and Germany declared war on the United States, or rather when Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor and Germany attacked the United States, and declared war on the United States. Whereas in reality, for the Chinese people, the Second World War began much earlier, specifically in 1937, when Japan and China found themselves in a situation of outright war. Having said that, the point to also understand about this war is that the many issues and quarrels that lay behind that war have never been fully resolved. While Japan felt itself comprehensively defeated by the United States and has allied itself with it, it has never fully accepted that its war against China was an aggressive, imperialist, predatory war, and it has always had a difficult relationship in consequence with China and with its other victim of that period, Korea. Moreover, Japan also continues to control certain territories, certain islands, which China claims as its own, and which the United States and Japan refer to as the Senkaku Islands. So Japanese and Chinese relations remain extremely fraught and difficult, and there are routine quarrels between them, and often a war of words, and this goes on virtually all the time. Now, to talk about Taiwan in the context of a Japanese Prime Minister's visit to the United States simply, therefore, from the Chinese point of view, pours fuel on the fire. And that is exactly, however, what happened. And it took place in the context of a US-Japanese joint statement that was published over the course of the Japanese Prime Minister's visit. And the difficult words, the really explosive words in this statement are contained in a single sentence. And they are these: we, that is to say, the United States and Japan, underscore the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and encourage the peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. Now, that doesn't formally recognize Taiwan as an independent country, but by calling for a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues between China and Taiwan, it practically does so. And this, of course, has provoked outrage and deep anger in China. And in fact, the Chinese have made certain very strong statements following this. Now, some of these have been made by senior Chinese officials, and including China's vice foreign minister and other senior officials who have spoken harshly about this statement. But here are some of the things that the Chinese have been saying, and it relates specifically to these words that appear in this statement about the cross-straits issue and about Taiwan. And this is from Global Times. Observers noted that the direct mention of Taiwan is a severe interference of China's domestic affairs and sends a signal that Japan and the US are attempting to contain China's possible moves to reunify with the island of Taiwan. Any attempt to undermine China's bottom line on the Taiwan question will definitely backfire. The joint statement demonstrates the hypocrisy of the US and Japan, as the mention of Taiwan will send a strong signal and adding fuel to the Taiwan separatists. This is to further bring regional instability where Japan will suffer. Vague expressions that actually alluded to the Taiwan Strait, such as the surrounding area and the surrounding situation, had been featured in the US-Japan statements before, but not directly mentioning Taiwan. The direct remarks have gone beyond the normal scope of bilateral relations and undermines peace and stability in Asia-Pacific. It is ironic that an attempt by a small circle of the US and Japan to divide and target other countries in Asia-Pacific could be described as free and open. And this has led to further commentary by China, and indeed there was some commentary about it which preceded this and which makes some comment by China about the kind of situation where China might actually go to war over Taiwan. And the Chinese are increasingly unequivocal about this. Specifically, even before Prime Minister Suga's visit to Washington, and even before the publication of that joint statement, there was a long editorial in Global Times, the semi-official newspaper, or English language newspaper, published by China by People's Daily, the People's Daily, which is the official newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party, which goes into all of this in great detail. And it says the following: there are increasing voices within the US calling on the country to change its strategic ambiguity toward the island of Taiwan. They believe Washington should be prepared to defend the island with force. Those who have called on such change said the Chinese mainland is becoming more capable and willing to realize unification by force. They think the strategic ambiguity can no longer show the US's determination and thus prevent Beijing from taking real action due to misjudgment based on this ambiguity. The US has maintained a strategic ambiguity towards the island of Taiwan. It supports the island, but declines to recognize Taiwan's secession. It acknowledges that there is only one China, but it has also issued the so-called Taiwan Relations Act, and has been maintaining closer unofficial relations with the island. It has kept providing the so-called protection to the island by selling weapons, but it refuses to compromise to interfere with military means when the island of Taiwan is under attack. The US strategic ambiguity has already become part of the status quo in the Taiwan Straits. The Chinese mainland's policy on the island of Taiwan have a clear goal of reunification as well as a strategically ambiguous part. We advocate peaceful reunification, but have never ruled out the possibility of using force. The Chinese mainland doesn't have a specific timetable for reunification. As for when force will be used, China's anti-secession law has determined 3 basic conditions. The island of Taiwan also has its strategic ambiguity. It has superficially maintained the laws and traditions of the Republic of China, but the present Taiwanese authorities are seeking Taiwan independence. The present Taiwanese authorities have been engaging in salami slicing tactics and have tried to gradually mix the concepts of sovereign independence and keeping status quo into one. And then China goes on to explain the position fairly clearly. Peace in the Taiwan Straits is fragile. If the United States takes the initiative to turn its strategic ambiguity into a clear commitment to Taiwan, the pattern of strategic ambiguity in the Taiwan Straits will fall apart. The Taiwan authorities, once they get the security commitment, will seek Taiwan independence relentlessly. The Chinese mainland will see no possibility of a peaceful reunification and will have to fully prepare for war. In other words, what the Chinese are saying is that if the United States announces that it is giving Taiwan a guarantee that it will protect Taiwan from a Chinese attack, then Taiwan will no longer be inhibited from seeking outright independence. And since outright independence of Taiwan is something that China can never accept, in that case, China will have to prepare for war in order to recapture it. That is very close to the situation that joint statement by the US and Japan comes to. When the United States and Japan speak about the need to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits, they are edging ever closer to a position where they give Taiwan, in effect, a commitment to protect it against China. At that point, the Chinese believe Taiwan will pursue independence and secession from China, and at that point, China, for its part, will move to a position of seeking to recover Taiwan by force, even if that risks war. And then, of course, Global Times gives the United States this warning. We would like to tell Washington not to make changes when it lacks resolve and ability. The United States' clearer commitment to Taiwan will not scare the Chinese government and people, but will only prompt them to make a resolute decision to eradicate Taiwan secessionist forces. We don't want to be engaged in a war, but we don't fear a war, especially a just war that safeguards our sovereignty and territorial integrity. The US miscalculated China 70 years ago, and hopefully it will not repeat the same mistake. The Chinese mainland will not bear Taiwan authorities seek independence with salami slicing tactics and to coordinate with the US's China containment strategy. If the island of Taiwan and the US persist, the Taiwan authorities will be wiped out sooner or later, no matter whether the US adopts strategic ambiguity or strategic clarity. The Chinese mainland will shake off the burden of Taiwan at all costs. If the US adopts a clear commitment to the island of Taiwan and leads to a sudden change in the cross-strait situation and makes the Chinese mainland determined to settle the Taiwan question, Washington will then face a dilemma. It will either have to make some symbolic noise and accept the reality of being ashamed in front of its allies, or it will have to launch a highly risky, large-scale war with China. If so, the US should start evaluating the price it will pay for that right away. They must be aware that the Taiwan question is the core interest of China, and we will never step back on it. So there it is. It's absolutely straightforwardly said, and it comes from Global Times, which is about as close as you can get to a statement by the Chinese government. If the United States gives Taiwan a guarantee that it will protect Taiwan from a Chinese attack, Taiwan will then seek independence, at which point China will commit itself at some point to undertaking that attack. When that happens, the United States will be forced to decide whether it goes to war with China, with all the massive consequences that that involves, or whether it is completely humiliated when it becomes clear that its guarantee to Taiwan is empty and useless, and that the United States is incapable of acting upon it. In the latter event, the United States will be comprehensively humiliated and may lose the support of its allies, especially its allies in the Asia-Pacific region. In the former event, it would find itself in direct military conflict with a nuclear superpower. Now, there's been a fascinating article about this very topic by the former US intelligence officer, Scott Ritter, written, by the way, on RT. That's the website of RT, which is, of course, Russia's channel. Russia has a close relationship now with China, but Scott Ritter is an entirely independent actor. And in saying all of this, he, of course, is expressing his own views and certainly not Russia's, though I'm sure that the Russians themselves share many of these views. Anyway, the point Scott Ritter makes is that the United States is actually incapable of protecting Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack. And this is what he says. In 2018 and 2019, the US Air Force conducted detailed simulated war games that had its forces square off against those of China. On both occasions, the US was decisively defeated, the first time challenging the Chinese in the South China Sea, and the second time defending Taiwan, which China sees as an integral part of its territory, against the Chinese invasion. In 2020, the United States repeated the Taiwan scenario and won, but only barely. The difference in both 2018 and 2019, it played with the resources it had on hand. Last year, it gave itself a host of new technologies and capabilities that are either not in production or aren't even planned for development. In short, the exercise was as far removed from reality as it could get. The fact is, the US can only successfully defend Taiwan from a full-scale Chinese invasion in its dreams. Now, Scott Ritter is a former US military officer, and I've no doubt that when he says all of this, he is reporting what is factually correct. And as a former intelligence officer, he's no doubt familiar also with the war planning and war games that take place within the United States, and I've no doubt that he is reporting them accurately. So, over the course of the Japanese Prime Minister's visit, the United States came very close to making a commitment to protect Taiwan from China, apparently in a completely absent-minded way, without fully thinking through the implications. It could very well turn out that the Taiwanese will interpret that as a carte blanche to seek independence from China. And indeed, if that happens, as we know, and as I've discussed, there are people in the United States who would support it. In that case, Global Times has made crystal clear that China will plan and prepare for war, and we have simulated war games run by the United States which show that in the event of a Chinese attack on Taiwan, the United States is not able to defend Taiwan by conventional means. So what happens in that event? Does the United States pull back? Does it allow Taiwan to be overrun, showing its commitment to defend Taiwan to be a dead letter? Or is it prepared to use nuclear weapons against a nuclear superpower? One, moreover, which is now in de facto alliance with another nuclear superpower, with an immeasurably more powerful nuclear arsenal, one fully capable of destroying the United States, which is Russia. It is beyond reckless that the United States should find itself in a situation where it may actually be put in a position of having to make those sort of choices. The fact that it is doing so, apparently without much understanding of what it is doing, is alarming and reckless indeed. Now, there are other very remarkable facts about Prime Minister Suga's visit to the United States, which I could also discuss. The first is the extraordinary fact that he had a meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris before he met the President of the United States. We've already seen how increasingly Kamala Harris and Joe Biden seem to speak to world leaders as if they were equals running the US government together, rather than Kamala Harris being, as the Constitution clearly designates her, very much President Biden's subordinate. Then there is also a very strange news conference which President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Suga had together, in which Prime Minister Suga seemed to be answering all the questions. But this extraordinary statement, this extraordinary sentence that was inserted in this statement, this joint US-Japanese statement, one wonders who exactly drafted it and how it was inserted there, and whether either Harris or Biden or any of their officials fully understand its implications and its potential consequences. I hope and pray that wiser councils in the United States will indeed eventually prevail, because from long study of China, a country in which I have long had great interest, I can say that one of the fundamental lessons of diplomacy, one of the two basic lessons of foreign policy, is that you do not march on Moscow and you do not bluff Beijing. If you do, your bluff is always at some point going to be called. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that long, intricate video on this complex subject. Please join me for other videos, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also check out Alex's channel. You will find links under this video. Please also check us out on our various platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey. And please also, to the extent that you can, support us via Patreon, PayPal, and Subscribestar. And please remember, we accept donations and payments in all currencies, including all the new currencies which have been appearing in recent years. Lastly, don't forget to go to our Discord server and also check out our shop, the amazing things that we have there, our amazing magic mugs, our phenomenal t-shirts, our sweatshirts, our hats, our hoodies, and all the rest. And of course, you support us by buying these wonderful things that you will find in our shop. And of course, you will be the proud owner of those things when you do buy them. And please also remember to check your subscription to this channel and to give this particular program, if you like it, obviously, a like. Thank you for joining me on this difficult and complex and rather fraught subject of China, the United States, and Taiwan. And I look forward to you joining me on future programs, and have a wonderful day until then.